Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court appointed and private, marriage counseling, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Counseling and Therapy Services at 301-325-1550. And our website is lifecoachdanamzalag.com. Now, today, I'm very excited to have on our podcast on season 2, episode 5, a very special guest and leadership coach, Carissa Karban. Just like every of my past episodes, I will leave it up to the guest to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Carissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dan. I'm very thrilled to be here. As you said, I'm a leadership coach. I really specialize in helping leaders to become the true leader of their own lives. And that means taking a look inside themselves, really confronting what's holding us back. How do we doubt ourselves? How do we limit ourselves? What are those stories that we tell ourselves? And I help leaders really overcome that so they can claim the confidence to take action and really create the life that they want.
Beautiful. So what is the first recommendation that you give to leaders in organization, either like we're talking about medium size and companies or large size? What is the best, most effective approach that you would give them that would motivate their staff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one that I recommend the most is to get curious. Oftentimes, especially as leaders, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to think, I'm supposed to have all the answers. I'm supposed to have this all figured out. I can't show any sort of vulnerability. I can't make mistakes. And those oftentimes are just things that we say in our head. So I encourage people to get curious first and foremost, right? Be open to thinking about things differently, learning a new way of doing things. And then right on the heels of that, I think one of the most powerful shifts that leaders can undergo that really helps their team especially is to stop looking to assign blame. Oftentimes, especially in business, we think, well, how did this go wrong? Why did this happen? And we look for that root cause. Not to say that's not important, right? We do, of course, want to understand how a situation happened. But instead of focusing our energy and attention on figuring out who's to blame, or more importantly, trying to make sure that we don't get the blame put on ourselves, I encourage leaders to change that and to shift and to look for what part did I play in this? How can I own and how can I take responsibility for this? And I tell you what, it surprises people to hear someone say, I'm looking to own my part in this and I want to take responsibility. So get curious and stop looking to put blame on other people.
So what kind of scenario would you approach, Carissa, when it comes to leaders dealing with toxic employees in the organization? I mean, obviously, toxicity have to do with their own perception about or their motivation at work, if they're not being motivated enough, if they're not being challenged enough. So how would you approach this for leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really common situation that leaders are in, kind of the bad apple. What do I do with this employee? I don't know how to handle it. And the first and foremost for me is empathy, right? To understand what is it about this employee that is leading them to show up in this way, to slow the team down or to always resist change or whatever it is in today's environment. Of course, resistance to change can really put the brakes on a lot of initiative, a lot of business, a lot of revenue for the company.
Right.
And so for me, empathy is really important. And it goes back to that curiosity too. Instead of thinking, how do I handle or how do I deal with this person? I encourage leaders to say, how can I better understand this person and what they're going through? What needs do they maybe have that I'm not meeting as a leader? How can I change their role to better suit their strengths and what they enjoy? And how can I find a stretch assignment that challenges them? And so a lot of it is really about transparent and honest communication. We think, oh my gosh, I can't bring this up because I'm supposed to have it figured out, or I don't like confrontation. I don't like these messy conversations. But when we create the space to communicate and we allow people to say, we ask them questions, what's going on with you? I'm noticing this. This is my experience, right? Not pointing the fingers of you're doing this, you're doing that, or you're not doing this or that, but instead say, here's my experience. And I would like to know more about your experience. How are you feeling? What's happening with you? And then co-create a plan together. As a leader, you don't need to have all the answers. And honestly, I think our power as leaders comes in empowering those who are on our team and really looking for opportunities to give them a voice, give them credit, and enroll them in how they do the work, when they do the work, what kind of work they're doing. So it really can be a two-way street.
I'm sure that you may relate to this movie Up in the Air with George Clooney, where he was sent to different companies and fired those who actually
Yes.
are.
Yes.
So is that really something that leaders would actually utilize instead of them being the mean person to fire others? They will subcontract it to other companies to do the dirty job?
Absolutely. People do it, right? It's a scary thing. So that's where I don't assign blame. I don't assign judgment. It's a really uncomfortable situation. No one wants to be in it. So if we're given an opportunity to say, hey, I'll take on that job for you, why wouldn't we want to do that, right? It sounds easier. It sounds like, sure, you take out the dirty laundry, right? But again, I think so much of business is rooted in our humanity and in our connection. Mm-hmm. And if we outsource this job of taking away someone's livelihood to someone who doesn't know them, doesn't know their kids' names, doesn't know their personal situation, it comes across as very cold. And there's actually a beautiful opportunity to connect with someone and share your intention about helping them find a new role or find a new passion that will serve them and will serve the company even better. So I think there's a lot of fear, but what I've seen with leaders, especially when I coach them to lean into that and they finally have the conversation they've been avoiding for months, 9 times out of 10, they come back to me and say, wow, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So we build it up in our head, and oftentimes it's not actually that bad.
So what would you say about the major disconnect that we have between upper management and staff in different organizations that creates this sense of like unease that they have for upper management to be able to talk to their staff because they don't know their staff? So right. How would you reconnect that bridge that at least some leaders may find it to be opportunistic?
Sure. Yeah, I think communication, conversation, connection. I think that especially as we rise in the ranks of a hierarchical institution, especially, a lot of times leaders are very busy, right? We always have more work to do than we have hours in the day. That doesn't seem to change. And so we tend to we start believing that, okay, I can make a decision based on looking at a spreadsheet. And we make a lot of decisions in business based on numbers and revenue and kind of the less of the human side of the business. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of it is building these walls that we're not intentionally building, but at some point we think, I've come too far, I can't go back now. And so then we stay on this pattern and this cycle. And so to break that cycle, I encourage people to just reach out, schedule a 30-minute call with someone that you haven't connected with in a while, and don't have any agenda other than to connect and to learn about that person. And it's amazing. We all know these days, people don't leave companies, they leave managers.
Correct. Exactly.
It's amazing the difference it can make when people feel that their leader actually cares about them. And I want to be really, really clear here. Don't act like you care if you don't actually care, because people can pick up on that very, very quickly. We pick up on that inauthenticity. We can pick up if it's, oh, they're just trying to check a box. They're just trying to get me out of their hair, whatever it is. So I encourage you to actually care, actually want to know about your employees' lives and who they are as people. Yes, the work will always be there, but as we know too, when people get to the end of their lives, what do we put on our tombstone? We don't put our job titles. We don't put how many hours a week we spent in the office. We reflect on the roles that we played and the connections that were most important in our lives. So I encourage leaders to bring that humanity and connection back into business.
Would you say, Carissa, that the movie Office Space is a major perception of how organization works nowadays, which when, let's say, a message have to be shared, they just send like a TPS report or like a memo. And does this representation of organization, is it creating a major problem in terms of lack of motivation from their staff and them wanting to leave the organization because they feel that they're not challenged enough?
Sure. I think it's challenge. And, for anyone who hasn't seen Office Space, I highly recommend it because it's a little cringeworthy because of how true it can be.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it came out, decades ago, and it's still very relevant today. So I think as humans, we want to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to be valued. And when I feel that if I unfortunately got hit by a bus or if something happened to me tomorrow, if the position that I'm in, if the job description and the hiring for that happens before my obituary is even posted,
Yes.
why would I invest myself in this company? Why would I spend nights and weekends? Why would I think about it while I'm driving down the road? Why am I going to invest myself in a company when I know that company doesn't care about me or isn't invested in me? And so a lot of times when it comes to connection and vulnerability, we tell ourselves, I'll be vulnerable when that person is vulnerable. But what we know is that someone has to take the first step. And so when it really comes to putting that humanity back into business, I do unfortunately think Office Space is representative of many companies where it's just a numbers game, a one size fits all message and approach, and we're missing out on so much. Our connections and the ability to have a really rich community at work and to really care about each other. We think, I don't have time for that. Well, look at what it's costing you to not do those things.
Well, that's a very good point. But now, how can you allow leaders, especially now in the 21st century, or especially after this pandemic, now that everything is done remotely, do they still have the power to impact their staff to stay motivated now that there's not much face-to-face happening anymore? So the level of, or I would say the method of motivation that they used to do in the past no longer is applicable today. So how would you go around that?
Wow, great question, especially in like you said, the pandemic, the great resignation that we're living through right now. And I think we need to adapt, right? Thinking about, oh, I'm just transferring all of my meetings online and it's just business as usual. Doesn't work. And so what I really encourage people to do is be proactive, take the initiative, figure out what does work for you. Is it a weekly happy hour with your team? Is it an icebreaker at the beginning of your team meetings? There are a lot of ways to fuel connection, even in a remote environment. But when it comes to motivation, you said something really interesting. Now that we're not face to face, I think it's also about recognizing how often leaders use fear, scarcity, and control to quote unquote motivate their workers. So in a remote environment where you can't see, you can't look over someone's shoulder, you can't pop into their office or their desk space unannounced, they're not looking over their shoulder. We need trust more than ever. So I actually think there's a beautiful opportunity for leaders to adapt. We have to challenge the status quo. What got us to where we are is not going to get us into the future. So yes, it might take a little more effort. We need to carve out that space to think, what can I be doing differently? How do I show up for my team differently? What actually motivates them? If you're a leader who's really relied on that command and control style, yeah, I hate to tell you, that's probably not going to work anymore.
That's a good point. Now, I'm not sure if you had the chance to read the story just recently. The CEO of Bettercom
Sure did.
hired 900 of their staff, like those mortgage and mortgage bankers, whatever it is, because of how they took advantage of their clients, etc. Now, he got them all together and he said, if you're in this call, that means that you're fired.
Yep.
Now, was this a better approach, or was this something I'm sure that he was stretched to the limit in terms of what their staff been doing, how dishonest they were? Was there an alternative solution to what you would suggest to that CEO?
Personally, yes, 100%, definitely a different solution, because I think another thing, just an additional piece of context that I heard about too, was not only did he lay off 900 people in one call, but after that call ended, it was hours before those people were contacted by HR, before they were told what their compensation package was going to be. So people were left unknown. There was a lot of fear, a lot of unknown. What's going to happen? What am I looking at? What do I tell my spouse, my kids?
Correct.
So I think there were a lot of things that could have been done differently. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting was the CEO mentioned in that call, this isn't the first time that he's had to do this in his career, this kind of mass layoff, and it's really hard. And so for me personally, I would have looked for ways to avoid that situation, because if you've done it once in your career, you know it really, really sucks, frankly. So I would have done everything in my power to not have to repeat the same circumstance. But if a situation arose, it is what it is, right? There's no getting around it to avoid that situation. I really, really believe that it's about cascading the message in a way that conveys care, empathy, and investment in these people, right? We're going to help you navigate. We're going to give you career coaches. We're going to give you LinkedIn coaching. We're going to help you apply for new jobs. I didn't really get that sense of care from the CEO. It was like, yeah, this is really hard, but it is what it is. If you're on this call, here's the news. And so I think it came off as very cold and very uncaring. So I would have really worked with that CEO to infuse more humanity back into that message.
That's actually a very good point, Carissa, because as you said, and you did make a very good point, if let's say we don't know what was the severance package. So maybe the severance package could have been assistance for continuing, or let's say offering options of different jobs. But then again, if this person fired those people, that means that he didn't trust them. So how can he refer them to other opportunities if they will make the same mistake in other jobs? Again, if you are dishonest to the core, you're going to be dishonest wherever you go. So again, it's hard to know the whole story behind what happened with Better.com. But then what would you say, or what would you recommend to our listeners who are leaders in different organizations? What is the best strategy to be able to keep your staff motivated? And as you said, we're going through a great resignation, or they call it great revaluation.
I call it the Great Awakening.
Awakening, exactly, yes. And this revaluation awakening makes people realize that, you know what, I am dispensable. In a matter of minutes, if I leave the company, I'm going to be replaced with not even a question asked. So why will I invest my time, sacrifice for my family, etc., for a company who doesn't give a damn about me?
Right.
So this revaluation, they are starting to realize that I'm just a number. I'm just a social security number that means nothing. So how would you let leaders know, hey, this is the best way to be able to motivate your staff, to be able to make them a part of the organization?
Yeah, I'll definitely touch on that. And I think you said something really interesting too about kind of the dishonesty and the practices in the company. And I think that I choose to believe that everybody wants to do a good job. Of course, there are people out there who want to get something for nothing, want to take advantage of the system, but I choose to believe in the goodness of most people. And I think that a lot of the culture in an organization, a lot of the practices really lend themselves to kind of the slippery slope of ethical to unethical behavior. It doesn't really start with, an egregious a break of trust, a very unethical behavior. It's usually kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts. And I believe that many times people fall into these traps because of the expectations, because of the deadlines, because of how they're measured in their roles. They resort to covering things up or cutting corners that really, when we zoom out, so that it brings me to the idea of motivation. I encourage people to zoom out, not only to think long-term, which we tend to not do in business today. It's all about quarterly revenue, quarterly metrics, short-term. And when we can zoom out and look at both the long-term and the system as a whole, we start to see a lot of different factors at play. So I encourage leaders to really look at that. When we have a problem, we can tend to zoom in and it occupies a lot of our energy. We're focused on that problem. But when we start to zoom out, we start to see, oh, okay, maybe if I change this thing over here, that will create different results, instead of just hammering against one particular person on the team or one particular project. It's really about understanding the part that we play in the greater whole.
So you mentioned before we started this podcast about a couple of exercises that you want to be able to offer or share. What would be those couple of exercises for leaders to be able to at least absorb some kind of sense of what you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. I love action, and I lead my coaching clients through a lot of exercises to help reframe their perspective, to give them the confidence and the courage to take action. So one exercise that I love is when we think about the way that our brains work, we are inherently resistant to change. And as we know, living through a global pandemic, living through the changing nature of business, the pace of change itself can be really exhausting. What I do is I help clients kind of reframe our natural tendency in our brains. So naturally, what we do when we think of a change is we think about what is the benefit of staying the same and what is the cost of making the change? Because we don't really want to change. We like status quo. We want things to be as easy as possible. And change is uncomfortable. Change can be scary.
An unknown.
Normally, yes, it can be, right? And so this way of reframing, instead of thinking about the benefit of staying the same and the cost of making the change, I give people an exercise to instead think of what is it costing you to stay the same and what are the benefits to making the change. And so it's just a reversal of how we think about that change. And oftentimes people come back and say, wow, I hadn't even thought there are so many benefits to making this change that make me excited and I'm not scared anymore. Or they come to me and they say, wow, I didn't realize that staying the same was really holding me back in these areas. It wasn't until I thought of the cost of this change that now I don't want to stay the same because it's costing me all of this. So that's one exercise, is that reversal of cost and benefit when thinking about a change.
Beautiful. That's actually a very good point. And it's just a changing of words and scenarios that change
Mhm.
the whole dynamic on how people can actually or how leaders can actually perceive the changes that they want to invest into the company. And what would be the second exercise?
Yeah, I love it's similar, right? In terms of how we change the language that we use. And so when we think about our negativity bias, we tend to latch on to negative things. Think about it when someone gives you a compliment, oftentimes we deflect it, we don't really believe it. But if someone says something negative, it spins in our head all day, right? We're kind of wired to think more and focus about the negative things in our lives. So one exercise that I also help people do is to change I have to do this, into I get to do this. And here's a perfect example. I have to pay my bills. That may not feel like a choice that we have. I have to pay my bills. But when you really think about it, it is a choice. You don't have to pay your bills. Sure, your electricity might get cut off, your water might get cut off. There are consequences to not doing that. So you choose to pay your bills so that you can continue to enjoy the amenities and the luxuries and the electricity that you have, for instance. And so it's really about reframing it into, let's say you're complaining about doing the dishes after dinner. So instead of I have to do the dishes, thinking, wow, I get to do the dishes because it means I was able to feed my family, right? So it's such a shift into gratitude,
Yes.
into, I get to do these things and I choose to. Because oftentimes when we think I have to, we feel out of control. We feel like it's not up to us and we don't have a choice. So when we really start to embrace that everything that we do in our lives is actually a choice, again, it may not feel like a choice, but we're still trying to avoid a negative consequence that we don't want. So it's really about shifting from I have to do this into I get to do this.
It's basically changing perception of what
100%.
element is. And
And
actually,
perception is reality.
that is correct. And it's interesting because if you have no dishes to clean, that means that you didn't have any food to serve. So that's
Exactly.
very, very deep. Now, if any of the leaders or as listeners, they want to be able to reach out to you, Carissa, where can they find you?
Absolutely. If you can figure out how to spell my name, then it's not very hard. So it's my website is carissakarban.com. Very easy to find me. On LinkedIn, my name, Carissa Karban. Instagram, my handle is the same. I love to interact. I post a lot on LinkedIn. I'm very active on Instagram as well because I really love sharing my life and helping people get to know me. Because what I say when people are thinking about investing in a coach, you want it to be someone that you connect with, someone you aspire to be more like, someone whose values align with yours. So I do my best to be very transparent in showing up as my authentic self. So if you're interested, I do have spots available for one-on-one coaching. I would love to hear from you if this content resonates and maybe you have that tickle of, wow, this sounds like it could be really interesting, and you're ready to kind of dive in a little bit deeper and you want support on that journey. Please come find me. I'd love to hear from you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, that is all the time that we have for today's episode. I do appreciate you, Carissa, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us. And again, thank you so much for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story and knowledge. Now, we hope that you have all enjoyed today's episode, especially for all the leaders out there. I'm very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for the Happiness Journey podcast on season 2, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you listened to today. Now, here are a few concluding words of wisdom. Discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. Just like action and belief are bridges between thoughts and things through the laws of attraction. To succeed, you have to go all the way and not half-ass. Remember that success will never come and look for you, but you must go out there and look for it. Every day is a new day and also is a chance for you to change your life for the better. Never linger too much into the past. And there's a reason why the car's windshield is so much bigger than the rear view mirror. So many more opportunities are open in front of you and not in the back. My name is Dr. Dan Amzalag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.